All right, I think with that, we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. I'll repeat that again in case you've just logged in. This is the 6th discovery session that we are hosting, focusing on commercial deep retrofit research findings. My name is Dean Jones. I am Principal Investigator and Lab Supervisor at SAIT's Green Building Technology Access Center, and you'll get a bit more information on that coming up. Just want to make note that the session is being recorded, and this will be hosted on the same ENBIX resources page that you logged into, or the events page that you signed up for. There's also a resources page within the ENBIX website. This is our session agenda. We'll quickly go through a land acknowledgement, and Alberta Ecotrust will introduce the Retrofit Accelerator program. I'll give you a bit more information on our SAIT Green Building Technology Access Center. I'll introduce our presenters today. We'll be given a presentation by WSP Canada, then RFS Energy. And then at the end, we're hoping to have about 15 to 20 minutes of question, answer, and discussion period. So with that, just a bit more information on the Q&A. Within your Zoom, there should be, if you don't see it as a question and answer box that comes up, within the More button, the 3 dots, there should be a Q&A in there. With that, we're going to go through both presentations just for timing, just to keep everything flowing. If you have a specific question for WSP as they're presenting first, maybe you can write that in and note WSP. If you have a specific question for RFS, you can just write RFS and then follow your question. If the question's relatively quick and easy to answer, or one of our presenters could maybe type an answer back to you. If it's a bit more of a discussion or lengthy answer, then we'll save it for at the end. So I'll quickly start with the land acknowledgement here. We acknowledge the traditional lands and territories of the Indigenous peoples who have lived on these lands and have taken care of them since time immemorial. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. What became known as the province of Alberta in 1905 is also the traditional and ancestral home to many diverse Indigenous peoples. This includes Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and Treaty 8 nations, the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising of the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani First Nations, the Cree, Dene, Nakota Sioux, Saulteaux, and the Otipemisiwak Métis government, which is now recently, I just heard, was recently renamed. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Amy Spark from Alberta Ecotrust.
Great. Thanks, Dean. So as mentioned, this session is being co-hosted by Alberta Ecotrust and SAIT. If you're not familiar with Alberta Ecotrust, we are a charitable organization that advances environmental and climate solutions across Alberta. You can go to the next slide, Dean. So we've been around since 1991. We partner with governments, industry, nonprofits, and Indigenous communities to mobilize resources, deliver innovative programs, and support impactful projects. We are a founding member of the Low Carbon Cities Canada Network, which is a national initiative accelerating equitable climate solutions in cities through our Climate Innovation Fund. So if you want more information about that, I recommend checking out our website. Next slide, please. So relevant for our conversation today, we have our buildings department. We have 2 main initiatives under this umbrella. So the Emissions Neutral Building Information Exchange, ENBIX, as Dean mentioned, is an industry-led collaborative platform to share knowledge and support sustainable building and renovation practices across Alberta. So that's where many of the resources that will be referenced during today's discussion are already posted up on the ENBIX resource library. And the recording from this session will also be housed there in the next couple of weeks. We also have an events calendar, so feel free to check that out. We've got lots of upcoming trainings, events, webinars, lots of things always going on. The other half of our buildings team is the Retrofit Accelerator. So we work with various partners, including SAIT, obviously, as well as the Pembina Institute. And that's really focused on developing retrofit-specific research and resources, including the session today. The last partner I want to highlight is really the Alberta Energy Efficiency Alliance, which hosts the Retrofit Vendor Network, which is really designed to bridge that gap between building owners that are seeking sustainable upgrades and Alberta's consultants and contractors that provide that energy efficiency and decarbonization expertise. Next slide, please, Dean. So the program that we're probably best well known through the Retrofit Accelerator is our free coaching program. So we offer free coaching support to help building owners navigate the entire retrofitting process. So this goes from the very beginning, identifying retrofit opportunities, all the way through to providing funding support for energy assessments and deep retrofit planning. The program is eligible for multifamily, residential, commercial, and institutional buildings. If you can just click ahead, please, Dean. One thing we just want to highlight that due to high demand, we have currently paused intake into new applicants into the program. So if you didn't get a chance to submit your interest before, have no fear. You can still add your name to a wait list. And once some more capacity and our funding opens up again, we'd be happy to support you through that program. And if you have any questions about what that program pause looks like, please feel free to reach out to me. All right, next slide, please. So before I pass it back to Dean, I just want to take a minute to really thank our funders. The reason that we're able to offer all of the coaching services for free and fund 50% of the energy study costs is because of our funders. So through support by Natural Resources Canada and RBC Foundation's Tech for Nature program. So we're really grateful for their ongoing support. And I'll give it back to you, Dean.
Thank you, Amy. All right, I'll introduce our SAIT Green Building Technology Access Center. So our mission is to prove, implement, and commercialize new building materials, systems, and methods that lead to the construction or retrofit of buildings to be higher efficiency, lower emission, healthier, and more environmentally friendly. We want to collaboratively create and de-risk holistic high-performance building solutions to address the environmental, social, and economic realities of today. We also want to develop and provide training and support systems to upskill the residential and commercial construction industries. Here's a picture of some of our facilities on SAIT campus in the northwest corner. And these are the primary research focuses: energy management and renewable energy integration. We have advanced building and material science. You see the picture in the middle there. That's an example wall library that we integrate with some of the curriculum in schools within SAIT, such as the architectural technologies, the civil engineering. Those students quite often make their way over and visit and see actual constructed assemblies. Also, we focus on environment and our architectural ecology. And the picture you see there is an example of our water lab in the basement of our facility, which is right next to a 38,000 liter cast in place concrete rainwater harvesting cistern. So we use that water within the building to flush toilets and for outdoor hose bib use. A couple other great pieces of infrastructure that have newly come online, one of them being the environmental weathering chamber you see on the left side of your screen. That is a piece of infrastructure that we can essentially test about a 9-foot by 9-foot wall section that we would sandwich those two ends. The one end on the right can roll, and you end up butting up the wall sample within that weathering chamber. It has a chiller, and the intent is that we have a cold condition side, and an indoor condition side. And on the cold condition side, we are meant to get to, in our first test that we ran, got down to about -29, and then on the interior condition, we kept that at about, the ambient temperature of the facility there, about 18 degrees. In one specific test, we had to make an example of a high humid environment. So we actually installed humidifiers within that interior condition to test our client's wall panel sample. On the right side is our E72 structural testing apparatus that's just getting finally commissioned. This is an old piece of infrastructure that had to get decommissioned while we got our new sprung structure built. And we're just in the midst of finalizing the actual custom-made on-site with our own applied research partners, the data acquisition and control system. So SAIT's involvement, or the GP tax involvement within the DRAI project itself. Well, there's two main deliverables that we're focusing on. One of them being this retrofit discovery sessions, such as you're attending today. This is the sixth session. The final two remaining ones, there'll be one more presentation delivered in Calgary in person. And as of right now, it's June 11th, and we're going to be focusing on the Glenbow Museum, downtown Calgary. That was still technically under construction, but they did a large retrofit on that building, and we'll be showcasing that. Within the final quarter, or I guess which quarter that is, July through September, we'll be doing another in-person session, my apologies, in Edmonton, and that'll be our 8th and final discovery session. That one will be focusing on the Arts Hub Ortana building, tentatively, and focusing on some MURBs, and then we'll also get some the coaching feedback from the DRAI, some of the coaches' feedback. Another main deliverable as part of our project is this market and gap analysis. And as you can see the deliverables on the screen there, this is where it comes to our presenters today. Our vendors that have been supporting and assisting us in this research, WSP Canada and RFS Energy Consulting, are going to be the ones presenting a bunch of the research, the great research findings that they've done over the last year and a half or so. This project carries on until about another year, so ending March 2027. So there's still some more deliverables that we'll be working on, but we wanted to capture their information to date within these discovery sessions. Okay, so with that, I'll introduce our panel presenters today. First, from WSP Canada, I have Hannah Lapp. She's a senior advisor in WSP's climate risk and resilience team with experience supporting municipalities on climate adaptation and low carbon policy and planning. Her work focuses on integrating resilience and decarbonization strategies into infrastructure and community level decision making. Next, we have Andrew Russell. He's an engineer, is an energy advisor at WSP, and provides advisory services to the project team on National Energy Code for building and its implications for deep energy retrofits. He brings extensive experience in energy modeling for both new construction and retrofit projects across a wide range of Part 3 building types. Next, we have Kara Beecham. Kara has a depth of experience in desktop and market research focused on energy efficiency, clean energy, and the building sector in collaboration with nonprofits, utilities, industry partners, and Indigenous organizations. She holds a background in environmental studies with a minor in Indigenous studies from the University of Manitoba and is currently completing a master's degree in public health at Lakehead University. Her work is guided by a commitment to advance healthy, built environments for Indigenous peoples and communities across Canada through research. Kara is from the Moose Cree First Nation and Thunder Bay, Ontario, and is currently based in Treaty 1 territory, Winnipeg, Manitoba. Next, we have Shafraz Kaba. Shafraz is a registered architect with over 26 years of experience specializing in zero carbon, climate resilient buildings. He is a leader of integrated project delivery at Stoke and is passionate about sharing his many lessons learned with others. He is previously known for his work at Manask Isaac Architects, now Reimagine, where he focused on net zero energy and carbon emission reducing goals for buildings. Shafraz now facilitates the creation of regenerative, net zero energy and carbon neutral projects using lean culture and design thinking. He brings together architects, engineers, trades, contracts, and clients to enable high performance results. Okay, with that, I'm going to pass that over to our WSP team.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dean, for the lovely introductions. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to be here. My name is Hannah Lapp, and I'm here with my colleague, Andrew Russell. We're so pleased to be part of this work with SAIT and Ecotrust in support of the Deep Energy Retrofit Accelerator initiative, and to share some of the research and analysis that we've completed over the past year or so. So for our presentation today, we're going to focus on two different areas that are central to scaling deep energy retrofits in Alberta. So that's the regulatory environment and then the technologies and workforce skills that are needed to support high performance buildings. So we'll start by walking through the code landscape and some of the limitations that municipalities and practitioners are currently working within. And from there, we'll look at the technology trends, labor market pressures, and some skill gaps that are shaping retrofit readiness across the province. As Dean mentioned, I believe we're going to hold questions until the end, but of course, feel free to ask them in the Q&A box as we go. And with that, I will pass things over to my colleague Andrew to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Dean. Thanks everyone for joining this presentation today. Happy to present on our findings so far. I'll be focusing on the code and regulatory review portion of the presentation. Then we can go to the next slide. So it'll be a current code review and how that specifically applies or fits into the existing building retrofit landscape. Go on to the next slide. For starters, we thought it would be prudent to provide a bit of a background on the National Energy Code of Canada for buildings, so that if members in the audience aren't fully familiar with it, that this slide is to familiarize you with the components that we'll be discussing today. So NECB, National Energy Code of Canada for buildings, has been around since 1997. Since then, we've gone through 5 additional versions of NECB, the most recent version being NECB 2025. The NECB covers Part 3 buildings, so those greater than 3 stories and having a building area greater than 600 square meters. And it really sets out the minimum requirements for energy efficiency of new buildings. There has been an addition now, thankfully, for alterations to existing buildings, but historically it's been focused on new buildings, focusing on building envelope, the HVAC systems, surface hot water heating, and lighting systems. How does it relate to the National Building Code? So it acts as really a companion to the NBC, specific to those energy and GHG requirements. It's up to provinces and territories have the option, or they can choose whether to adopt, modify, or integrate requirements into their own building codes. An example being Quebec. Quebec has made a lot of amendments to NECB that they wish to have, and that's acceptable to do that. So modifications can be made to it depending on the jurisdiction. Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Quebec, PEI, and Nova Scotia all have adopted, or all provinces that have adopted NECB 2020. Adoption isn't automatic, so the jurisdiction can decide when to adopt, or when to amend, or to delay implementation. You could have an instance where a jurisdiction has adopted NECB or the National Building Code 2020, but still prefers to reference NECB 2017, so a previous version. It's entirely up to the jurisdiction. As mentioned in Alberta, the 2023 Alberta edition of the Building Code references 2020 in both instances, National Building Code and NECB. The typical adoption cycle is 1 to 5 years, depending on regulatory review, industry readiness, and the alignment with climate or energy efficiency goals. The past code cycle saw the release of NECB 2025. And within that, there was a new part 13, that introduced alteration of existing buildings. The proposed changes within that new part went through a public review process in 2023, I believe. And then the final version of that was published just before Christmas. So for folks like me, it provided some nice reading material over the Christmas break. All right, so on to the next slide. With that in mind, the understanding of NECB and the different versions, what we're showing here is a table summarizing similarities and differences between the 2 latest versions of NECB. So NECB 2020, which I mentioned many provinces have adopted, and NECB 2025, which currently no jurisdiction has adopted NECB 2025, brand new. The table looks at sort of 3 primary components and compares them against those versions of NECB. Application, compliance trigger points, so energy efficiency compliance trigger points, and then the compliance path. So beginning on the top row with the application, NECB 2020 lacks a specific section on alteration of existing buildings. It has a section on additions, which would be a new construction component added to an existing building, but not the true retrofit scenario where you have an existing building and you want to alter it. Whereas NECB 2025, as mentioned, has introduced this new part 13, and it's specific to alterations on existing buildings. The middle row there looks at the compliance trigger point. So that NECB 2020, that's entirely up to the jurisdiction as a case-by-case interpretation of whether the alterations you're doing or the retrofit, they feel that requires compliance with NECB 2020. As mentioned, there isn't a specific section on that, and without that, an understanding of clear understanding of what would trigger a retrofit. It's often based on scale, or if a change in occupancy happens, they'll often require it. But as mentioned, it's a case-by-case scenario. Whereas go to the right, NECB 2025 now has prescribed thresholds in each part of or each section of Part 13. So based on the building system that you're altering, I'll go through them in the next slide. There's prescribed thresholds that would trigger compliance based on the size or nature of the retrofit. The final row there, is the compliance path. So in some sense, it's still pretty similar between the two, with some subtle differences. On the NECB 2020 side, compliance of an alteration would have to follow the prescriptive pathway. So those sections in each of the building system categories, you would follow the prescriptive pathway there. You could follow the performance pathway, which is Part 8 in NECB, but it gets quite complicated in an existing building situation. On the NECB 2025 side, we have the introduction of Part 13. And so the compliance path is through those sections in Part 13. But as we'll see, when a compliance trigger is enacted, they refer back to the prescriptive pathway. So in some senses, we're still complying with the prescriptive pathway in the majority of retrofits. But there are, as mentioned, there's like prescribed thresholds now that clearly identify when that needs to happen. And you can also still comply with the performance pathway, but it's still complicated. So move on to the next slide. Thank you. So with that in mind, I thought we'd have a look at some of the NECB 2025 Part 13 compliance triggers on 3 of the major building systems that are often altered from an energy efficiency standpoint. Looking at the first column there, building envelope, compliance with prescriptive requirements would need to occur if the wall, roof, floor that's being altered does not have a cavity that is fully insulated to its full depth with that performance of insulation. So RSI of 0.53, which is equivalent to fiberglass bat. So if you were adding exterior insulation, let's say to a wall, you wouldn't be required to meet the prescriptive Part 3 performance if the existing cavity was already fully insulated. Going on to lighting, an example that they have, NECB 2025 has for compliance trigger there is if the total wattage of the new and existing luminaires that are being altered is greater than 2 kilowatts, then the code refers back to the prescriptive requirements of Section 4. So if you're doing less than 2 kilowatts of alteration, when you combine the new and existing wattage, then that doesn't meet the threshold. You don't have to show compliance, but anything over that, you do. From the HVAC standpoint, 2 examples I thought were interesting to share. Can affect, you could do an alteration on HVAC system and it have effects on existing components that aren't being altered. So the way they identified the compliance triggers here are if the added thermal load to the HVAC system is greater than 60% of the peak design load supplied by the existing system, then you refer back to prescriptive requirements. Likewise, if the added ductwork or piping is greater than 60% of the existing distribution system, again, the code refers to the prescriptive requirements. Next slide, Dean. So to wrap up the code and regulatory sort of section of the presentation, put together a SWOT table here to really look at where this introduction of Part 13 to NECB is strong, where there's chances to improve, what possible risks are out there that we foresee. So beginning with the strengths column, it's great that this part is now introduced because it targets only the altered components, and it avoids unnecessary whole system upgrades. It establishes clear upgrade trigger points. So it's now much easier to understand before you go to the permit stage as to whether the alteration you're doing to the building needs to comply with prescriptive requirements. It also ensures alterations do not reduce overall building performance. So by having the requirement to meet prescriptive requirements, it's encouraging that, or it's mandating that alterations need to meet those minimum energy and GHG requirements. From weaknesses standpoint, it still does not establish a flexible performance compliance pathway. So as mentioned, it's still quite complicated if the design team were to choose compliance with Part 8. It would be really nice if another section to Part 13 was there where the altered energy, the altered area of the building could be isolated and compared through a whole building energy model with that same scope of area in the existing building. But it's the way that Part 8 is written, it's the whole building that needs to be analyzed, and that's where it gets complicated. It hasn't been truncated to the area of the alteration. Other weaknesses are it cross-references multiple parts in NECB, so it's complex there. Those 60% HVAC thresholds I mentioned have the potential to trigger other unplanned system replacements. That's a weakness or a short sight. And it doesn't necessarily ensure that the alterations reduce GHG emissions. So you might have an existing building that has a centralized air-to-water, water-to-water heat pump. There's nothing saying that the alteration could remove that and replace it with an electric boiler. So it doesn't necessarily ensure that GHG emissions are reduced. Opportunity standpoint, it's great. It supports phased deep retrofit strategies, so enabling incremental improvements to operational energy efficiency, drives modernization. It allows alternate solutions in areas where the building is complex or has heritage designation, and it can align with GHG reduction programs and energy transition policies. Lastly, on the threat side, the higher cost with more clear compliance triggers could discourage compliance or delay needed upgrades, where in the past the alteration may not have needed to be compliant with prescriptive based on the jurisdiction's interpretation. Older buildings could have physical constraints limiting full compliance, and there could be an instance where legacy equipment, existing equipment might be incompatible with the modern energy efficiency standards, forcing broader upgrades with the alteration. So with that, I'll pass it back to Hannah. She'll speak on the municipal boundaries training. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, so I just wanted to speak a little bit with regards to the sort of municipal constraints when it comes to the regulatory market. So as many folks might know, municipalities cannot require energy performance standards that go beyond the provincial building code. And since 2023, the city charter amendments for Edmonton and Alberta have also they've lost the authority to set local rules around energy consumption and heat retention in buildings. So really their tools that they have to regulate this really depends on incentives, education, voluntary programs. They cannot regulate that performance. And as a result of that, that does create a bit of a policy gap. So Alberta's code has, a certain tier of enforcement, and there isn't the authority for municipalities to push further, even if they may have, climate plans that call for deeper action on buildings. And that's why, some of the things that Andrew mentioned in the AEB code is so important because it does help to fill some of that gap by establishing those clear expectations and triggers for energy upgrades, something that municipalities currently can't do on their own. Next slide, please. But even with some of that limited authority, both Edmonton and Calgary are doing, a lot to support retrofit activity. And we thought it was important to kind of highlight how municipalities can operate within the regulatory sort of framework of the province. So in Edmonton, there's many things going on, but the few that I'll highlight is the Building Energy Benchmarking Program. This gives building owners data, coaching, and planning support for retrofits. They also have a wonderful client liaison unit, which also helps streamline permitting for more complex retrofit projects. And in Calgary, they have things like Benchmark YYC, and this helps large buildings track emissions and plan for their improvements. They also have the Home Upgrades Program, which helps go even further, offering free deep retrofits to income qualified households. So I just share this slide for the intent to highlight that even without maybe regulatory energy performance capacity, both cities are finding ways to sort of fill that gap. So using data, financing tools, and hands-on support to move those retrofits forward. Next slide. So this slide here marks the transition into the second half of our presentation. So to reach net zero buildings, we need more than updated codes. Of course, we need technologies that are ready to scale and a workforce with the right skills to deliver them. So this part of the presentation, we're going to focus a little bit on the research that we completed sort of mid last year, looking at Alberta's technology landscape, labor market trends, skills gaps, and training capacity. And the main point we really want to emphasize is that, of course, codes don't decarbonize buildings. It's really the workforce and technologies being ready to meet the high performance expectations that will do that. So for our sort of methodological approach to this training and skills gap, we looked at a bunch of different sources and employed a mixed methods process. So for our occupational and labor demand component, we began by mapping the full range of roles involved in deep energy retrofits. And to do that consistently, we classified each role using Canada's National Occupation Classifications, or what we called NOC codes. And this really allowed us to link the retrofit tasks to standardized occupational groups. And so then we use these NOC code classifications to then analyze provincial labor market forecasts to understand where there might be projected supply and demand imbalances out until 2030. This helped us quantify which occupations are most at risk of shortage and which ones might face skill gaps even if the total headcounts appeared to be stable. And then lastly, we linked those occupations back to the technologies we assessed. So we could see exactly where workforce constraints would limit the deployment of different technologies. Next slide. So this slide here introduces what we call the top 20 decarbonized solutions. And this was a framework that was developed to help pinpoint the technologies with the greatest potential to impact Alberta. So in our research, we reviewed a wide range of emerging and established technologies and evaluated them for things like scalability, proven performance, and relevance to Alberta's climate and building stock. So from that process, we narrowed the field down to around 20 solutions that consistently offered, strongest return across both Part 3 and Part 9 buildings. And the value of this list really was to help provide sort of a clear, actionable framework for our research. So it helped to focus some of the policy discussions, guide workforce training priorities, and speak to, directed investment towards the technologies that are most likely to deliver energy and emissions reductions in the province. Essentially, where can we get the biggest impact the fastest? Next slide. So as part of this research, we looked at trends in the high performance building technologies across the province. And what we found is that adoption really varies. In Part 9 residential buildings, overall uptake appears to be happening a little bit faster. This is especially true for things like air source heat pumps, basic envelope upgrades, rooftop solar, and even emerging, bi-directional EV chargers, because they tend to be easier to install. There's also a lot of support for utility incentives. But the Part 3 sort of commercial and institutional buildings adoptions are a little bit more cautious. Net zero systems specifically remain, a lot of them are maybe pilot projects, and a lot of this is driven by high costs, maybe colder climates, and system compatibility issues. But there has been a lot of progress when it comes to operational improvements. So better automation, DOAS ventilation, and lots of examples of early pilots in geo-exchange, thermal storage, waste to heat recovery. So we're seeing kind of progress across the board, but just maybe at different paces across the two types of buildings. We did also take a brief look at the sort of future technologies trends. So we're seeing a lot of early trials of things like phase change materials. These help to smooth out indoor and temperature swings. Also, technology like electrochromatic glass. This automatically adjusts tint to manage heat and glaze. And other technologies like modular ice-based energy storage, which shifts cooling demand to off-peak periods. So while these technologies aren't yet widespread, there are pilots underway across the province that show some strong potential, especially in, Alberta's sort of harsher winters, where the focus on improving resilience and managing peak loads is increasingly important. So we wanted to highlight that there is some interesting sort of new technology that's trending across the province. Next slide. But turning our attention more to the skills and labor side of things, one of the sort of key pieces that we found on the labor shortages side is that by 2030, the province is expected to face a shortfall of around 4,000 electricians, along with major gaps amongst HVAC technicians, plumbers, carpenters, and construction supervisors. And as we all know, these roles are essential for things like electrification, high performance mechanical systems, advanced envelope upgrades, and the risks that come with these shortages is a limit to the deployment of technologies. So even where overall staffing levels may appear sufficient, so for example, in engineering or technologist roles, there's also then within those roles some important skills gap that remain. A lot of those are highlighted on the next slide, but it's things like energy modeling, commissioning, complex system integration. And in order to meet that future retrofit demand, there's going to need to be investment in workforce deployment, expanding training capacity, and strong recruitment pathways. Otherwise, there could possibly be, some constraints associated with the deployment of deep energy retrofits because of a lack of qualified workers. Next slide. Our research also identified sort of 3 major skill gap areas. By looking at current training offerings, workforce trends, and the technical requirements of emerging retrofit technologies. So the first area that we looked at is digital and innovation or information technology skills. So these shouldn't come as a surprise, but AI support diagnostics, advanced controls, building automation systems, these skills are becoming foundational as buildings shift towards smarter, more connected systems. The second area, excuse me, apologies. The second area is modular and prefabrication skills. So this is reflecting the industry's move towards manufacturing style construction, earlier digital coordination and integration, design fabrication flows. And the third then is on this deep energy retrofit skills. So this includes things like building envelope science, whole building energy modeling, and also sequencing of retrofit measures, ensuring that the regulatory requirements and climate resilience practices are also all combined. So these gaps appeared across a whole host of different roles. As I mentioned before, things like engineers and site supervisors. So this is going to just be some important things to note as deep retrofits start to expand more across the province, that there are certain skill sets that will need to be honed and brushed up on as that continues. Next slide. So this final slide here just summarizes some of the key insights from this research. So some of these I've noted already, but just to kind of point out the highlights. First, technology adoption is uneven. We're seeing that Part 9 buildings are advancing maybe a little bit more quickly than some of the larger commercial industrial buildings due to differences in complexities and costs. Second, we're seeing that labor shortages are possibly widespread with electricians, HVAC technicians, plumbers, and supervisors, all possibly projected to be in shorter supply moving forward. We're also seeing a new hybrid role demand sort of emerging. So things like solar installation managers, geothermal technicians that require both, traditional trade skills, but new competencies in things like digital controls and energy modeling. And we also found that grid interactive and demand side solutions were kind of underutilized. So despite their strong potential for near-term emissions reductions. And then lastly, I think there's a need for ongoing research to help better map these skills to technologies and understanding some of the longer-term building performance needs. But I think one of the very positive takeaways here is that these findings really point to the fact that Alberta is making rapid progress. There is a clear and growing market for this work. There is very strong municipal interest to further this work. And there's also emerging technology momentum. So while targeting training, stronger industry partnerships, and folks' investment are important, this is going to be and make sure that Alberta is well positioned to build the workforce and technology capacity required to accelerate deep energy retrofits across the province. And I believe that is it for our presentation. So happy to answer questions at the end, and we'll pass things over back to Dean.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Hannah. I really appreciate your work and really appreciate you guys taking the time to present some of your findings. I will just make a reminder before we move on to the RFS presentation that if you have any questions that come up through the presentations, please do go to the question and answer box. If it's not located visibly, it's under the More button with the 3 dots, and you'll be able to see a Q&A listed there. All right. Next, we move on to RFS Energy Consulting and Research Group, and we have a presentation by Kara Beecham and Shafraz Kaba.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thank you to the SAIT team for that great introduction, and we're hearing from WSP as well. It was really cool to hear some of those findings. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm Kara Beecham, Senior Research Analyst with RFS Energy, and also part of the research team with Ask for a Better World. And so I guess before getting into the details and numbers, I'd kind of like to frame like what this research has looked like up to this point. So we'll be sharing information on kind of 2 factors that play a role in scaling up deep energy retrofits in Alberta as it relates to the commercial building sector. So we have on one hand, the financial incentives and market supports that are available for retrofit projects. And then also on the other side of things, we'll have some insights from Shafraz on kind of the training and education pathways as well that support retrofit projects. And so we've kind of, through this work, we've examined how these supports have evolved in Alberta since 2014 and compared that with kind of provinces that have a stronger system for deep energy retrofits. and looking at particular cases such as BC and Ontario. And so while training and financial incentives each have their own kind of unique roles and challenges in deep energy retrofits, they are closely connected. And so in jurisdictions where deep energy retrofits are more accessible, there tends to be a strong alignment between incentive programs, the training and skills development pathways, and kind of that overall market coordination is just a bit stronger. And so that alignment really helps create clear pathways for deep energy retrofit projects. And so I'll kind of start with this snapshot in the sense of Alberta's incentive landscape and some data that we found there on the next slide. And so to better understand Alberta's landscape, we wanted to identify kind of the incentive programs that were available between 2014 up to early 2025 that could support retrofits or related building upgrades to kind of get a baseline and see how things have evolved over time. And so over that time period, we were able to identify 55 incentive programs that were accessible to Alberta. And so just over half of these remain active at this time, while the rest have kind of been closed or paused, or there's kind of unknown information on them. And when we looked more closely at how these incentives are structured, we noticed kind of a few key things. Most incentives are government funded in some way, either at the municipal, provincial, or federal level. Municipal programs, kind of tended to lean towards rebates or grants, excluding the current commercial clean energy improvement program, which is more of a loan style. But active right now we know of are like the City of Banff rebate program, Medicine Hat Smart program, to name a few. And while federally funded programs often provided like the largest potential funding amounts, but they were usually loan style kind of financing. So you can think the Building Retrofits Initiative with Canada Infrastructure Bank, or municipal buildings financing with FCM. Another key finding was that very little were explicitly meant for commercial buildings or kind of whole building projects. Only about 36% of the programs we had identified actually applied to commercial buildings in some way. And so like SEEP and Canada Infrastructure Bank's program compared to about 62% that actually applied more specifically to residential buildings. And so while the number of programs has seen growth over this period from 2014 to early 2025, there has been a slow decline kind of in commercial focused incentives. And so overall, lacking the support needed for those whole building deep energy retrofit projects in large commercial buildings. And so on the next slide, we kind of explore what a more mature looking kind of retrofit space or ecosystem can look like. And one of the ones that we looked at as a strong example was BC. And BC is a province that has a fairly strong coordinated system for energy efficiency specifically, which can provide support for those retrofit projects. This can be tied to kind of this level of coordination that's happening across provincial programs, utilities, and municipalities, which is strongly guided or supported, I guess, by provincial policy, mandates, and regulations. And so major utilities such as BC Hydro and FortisBC play a significant role administering things like demand-side management focused programming, such as prescriptive rebates, or it can range from custom programs for larger commercial buildings. And in some cases, we see those programs are even delivered jointly or collaboratively, which is interesting. Like, for example, FortisBC and BC Hydro partner on this program called the Continuous Optimization Program, which is kind of focused on identifying the operational improvements and low-cost energy saving opportunities through a retro commissioning process for commercial buildings specifically. And then not only just like the major utility players in the province, but municipalities are also seen contributing through their own regional initiatives and tax incentives that really encourage those like large building upgrades, such as the municipality of Saanich. They have their climate action tax exemption program for commercial retrofits specifically. And so what overall kind of what stands out in BC is this coordinated system that provides multiple financial pathways to really enable retrofit activity alongside this kind of significant investment through utility DSM programming, which you can see a little bit on this slide. We've kind of outlined how much that looks like in a given fiscal year. But I'll speak to it a little bit further down on a separate slide before we move on from these regional focuses. And so we can go over to the next slide. And so this slide looks at another region, Ontario, kind of what is happening there. And so this also provides another example of a bit of a more robust, I guess, retrofit friendly kind of space. And so for context, in Ontario, the Independent Electricity System Operator, or IESO, as you might hear, kind of plays a key role in managing the province's energy, which was established by the provincial government. Also kind of delivers their own energy efficiency programming through Save on Energy. And they also have their own retrofit specific program, which is funded it's funded through ratepayer funds and offers a kind of prescriptive or a custom kind of stream for those retrofits. Other commercially focused incentive programs are supported by also local utilities or LDCs, including like Enbridge Gas, as well as some other municipal or nonprofit initiatives. And so together, this kind of creates this mix of program types, like prescriptive rebates for specific technologies, custom retrofit incentives, building recommissioning programs, and supports as well for energy manager positions within eligible organizations or building types. And another interesting policy that we noted in Ontario was this mandatory energy reporting for larger buildings. And so while it's not incentive specific, this kind of provides the province with good data on the different large buildings, but also provides those building owners with performance data, which can help kind of build that business case for retrofit projects and identify, opportunities for improvement within their buildings. And so, like similar to BC, Ontario utilities, like the ISO that we've kind of highlighted here, also invest like substantial funding into demand side management programming that can really support, commercial building energy efficiency projects. And so to kind of illustrate like the differences that these regions have in DSM funds, we also want to look at kind of like the overall scale of investment going into these kind of key programs from major utility players. And so we can find a little bit more about that on the next slide. Okay, and so this table here is kind of to provide kind of like a high level comparison of funds that go into incentives. And some important context here when we compiled this information into a table was we did so to see kind of the level of investment into energy efficiency programming across Ontario, BC, and then to show it kind of alongside what we found in the Alberta incentive scan, and to really kind of highlight that in incentive investment that we're seeing. So in provinces like BC and Ontario, large players or utilities such as BC Hydro, Fortis BC, and the ISO are kind of major drivers of energy efficiency program delivery, and their DSM portfolios kind of represent a significant portion of the available funding in those regions. And then for Alberta, obviously comparable utility data is not available in the same way. So instead, we kind of compiled the maximum advertised funding values from incentive programs that were identified in kind of that scan of what was available to Alberta during that time period. And so seeing these differences, this comparison is kind of intended to see a bigger picture of like the level of funds rather than like an apples to apples comparison. But you can see on the table, like in BC Hydro, and their given fiscal period for 2024, their total DSM expenditures were 73 million, and those focused on larger buildings like commercial or industrial program expenditures that accounted for like 37 million out of that year. So about 50% were related to programs that were helpful for deep energy retrofits for those large buildings. And that's kind of how the table functions throughout. And then we, at the very bottom, we have Alberta as this kind of aggregate of like what the incentives we found from this 11-year period. So there's a pretty significant incentive gap, I guess, or level of investment in incentives over within these examples. So it does kind of highlight this pattern in jurisdictions where utilities play a stronger role in delivering coordinated energy efficiency programs. There tends to be this greater investment and more pathways for deep energy retrofit projects. And so on the next slide, we wanted to kind of highlight a few key practices from these incentive models. I think my slide might have got misplaced. But maybe, I think it's at the very end. I think it might have got shifted down, but I can kind of jump back in when that best practices slide comes up.
Sure. I'll
Yeah.
take it from here, Kara.
Cool.
So essentially, as Hannah actually emphasized, I will echo, there's a massive skills shortage in the training and skills development programs that we looked at over the last decade. And as many of us in the industry know, we just can't find enough people to design as well as construct a regular building, let alone a deep energy retrofit and building with specialized systems such as geo exchange or solar heat pumps, etc. And unfortunately, also, we are dealing with many crises in the industry. So we hear almost a different crisis every day, grabbing the headlines. Like there's a housing shortage or crisis, there's cost escalation and affordability crises. Last year, we began the whole tariff crisis with not knowing how much tariffs will affect our pricing, our supply chain, all of our availability of things to build these types of buildings. And I think our industry is also suffering a little bit of siloed information that is a challenge. So we need to work better together so we can unlock a little bit more integrated and sort of strengthened support in our industry. So hopefully we can take some of those incentives, the few meager incentives we have in Alberta, and sort of start to address some of these challenges in our industry. Next. So in addition to what Kara explained on incentive programs, when we looked at BC and Ontario, we see sort of how incentives really also inspire or actually help facilitate the development of training and skills programs. As we saw with utilities funding lots of training and skills development at BCIT in British Columbia, it's always sort of followed that kind of money. And we've always known BC has been a bit ahead of the curve on sustainable design, on retrofits, on energy efficiency. And I hope we in Alberta can hopefully catch up. Otherwise, we're going to be saddled with an Alberta disadvantage. I'm really happy to say ENBIX has been modeled on programs in BC like ZEBEX and the Zero Emissions Innovation Center. So basically, those institutions have been really a great clearinghouse of information and programs and facilitation of uh, training skills and knowledge for how to do emission neutral buildings. And in Ontario, also a major hub of activity, we see how the City of Toronto had started sort of a retrofit innovation by looking at towers all around Toronto and starting with sort of inspiring how to deal with these 40 and 50-year-old buildings as energy pigs and how to start to develop them. Following all of those incentives of how to retrofit came programs. And in Ontario, SAIT is a major training hub. So the Canadian Institute for Energy training is sort of one of the biggest players in the training and skills development aspect of the market, as is the Canada Green Building Council, which has long provided sort of like the lead program and therefore also training around how to do energy efficiency and now retrofits. So we need to really look at how some of these major centers for trainings and skills development can be emulated or can be learned from. And honestly, when we were looking at training and skills development, one of the reflection points we had is we do a lot in universities and in trade schools, but they do very different things. Universities provide a really broad base of theory and design understanding and knowledge, whereas trade schools or technical or polytechnics provide very particular training. And somehow we, in the industry, need to integrate those things together. So we need to bring together, again, the design engineers and the trade partners to really like learn and play off each other. Next. So this is a rapid fire gap analysis on our training and skills development. So as we've been seeing in the news cycle or in our local context, we have a challenging landscape to deal with policy changing, especially in the deep energy retrofit and sustainable building landscape. Next. Basically, very recently, we've seen the whole scale eroding of sustainable building policies and entire departments. For example, the city of Vancouver let go all of their sustainable design department or facilitators that oversaw lots of their execution of energy efficient and zero carbon buildings. And this is kind of playing off of everyone's rush for cost reductions or red tape reduction programs and sort of trying to cater to a low taxation type of environment, which I think is going to be detrimental to our competitive advantage or our opportunity. Next. And really, federally, the elimination of the consumer carbon tax really hurts our business case for deep energy retrofits and basically erodes sort of the need or desire to build these because, again, the pro forma or the cost models are becoming harder to prove out unless you actually look at the total cost of ownership or look at the entire life cycle where they still make sense. So we really need to focus on the long-term benefits or even the energy efficiency benefits that help the bottom line, especially for end users. Next. And lastly, as Hannah also indicated, the market is looking at different types of skills or different types of priorities. And I guess artificial intelligence or AI has captured lots of the imagination of what people should learn or train up next. And I think we still have to remind them, as much as that is kind of an important aspect, the basics, the integration, and the tried and true technologies we need to learn to make deep energy retrofits happen is still based in the knowledge of trade partners and industry engineers that need to know how building systems work together in an integrated manner and pull sort of the new ideas of heat pumps, new ideas around district energy and sharing of energy in systems coming together. So lots of work to do and lots of hopeful competitive advantage to build on. Next. So again, reinforcing what Hannah showed earlier, we have a huge job vacancy issue, especially in the construction world. And again, this is going to be our challenge, is how to change the narrative of how there is a lot of opportunity in being in the building trades. There's a lot of opportunity in Alberta in particular to try and do more innovative deep energy retrofits if we can find and attract and retain the right people. And unfortunately, I'd have to say our provincial government does not make that easy. Next. And as we see other jurisdictions, they will be far ahead of us if we do not do more. And as Kara has shown, we need to start reinvesting in some of these technologies, some of these incentives, and definitely the training programs. Next. I think what Alberta might need to do is really take all of these ideas and challenge the market to basically solve this problem. Since we're such a capitalist kind of driven province where we want industry and less regulation to lead the way, maybe it's opportunities by private industry to really rise to the challenge. For example, like my old architecture firm, they basically saw an opportunity in specializing in deep energy retrofits and creating an opportunity for themselves to show leadership in this way and how it can be done cost effectively and with developers actually meeting their pro formas. So I think that is our challenge, and maybe that's our Alberta opportunity, is to, if government isn't going to incentivize and to build the training programs, we have to look to industry to lead the way. Back to you, Kara.
Yeah, thank you, Shafraz. Okay, so going back to kind of jumping around here to the incentives, kind of looking at those different models, kind of some of the best practices that we kind of highlighted from looking at BC and Ontario anyways. So quickly we'll kind of run through what we found. Obviously in both provinces, utilities can play a pretty central role, as noted, but the programs are also complemented by provincial and municipal initiatives in the region, which kind of allows for multiple entry points for building owners and reduces those barriers across not only building types, but also certain regions of the provinces that might have specific gaps or needs when it comes to deep energy retrofit projects. And then second, many programs go beyond prescriptive rebates for specific technologies and kind of instead target these more custom retrofit friendly approaches. And they're often paired with energy assessments or energy manager programs as well, which kind of encourage internal like capacity building to plan and deliver more complex retrofit projects. Third, we also see performance-based incentives were common and tend to encourage deeper energy savings by linking funding to measured improvements in building performance. And then finally, we saw programs that were focused on building recommissioning specifically, which kind of provides a useful starting point for older or more complex building types, usually to identify operational improvements and supporting that groundwork for larger retrofit projects over time. And so together, all these aspects and approaches can kind of create clear options for buildings to move from this maybe like singular upgrades to more deeper and whole building kind of retrofits. And yeah, I think that's kind of it for the incentive side of stuff.
And thanks, Amy, for putting in the chat our link to this Kumu heat map of training and skills development programs. What we tried to do with this is create a understanding of the types of programs, where they're based, what themes or what topics they cover across Canada. So they cluster in this interactive map around whatever filter you place on it. So you can filter by organization, or you can filter by theme or topic, or you can filter by location. So hopefully you all can explore this. It's available on the ENBIX site of all the programs that we have found across the country, and you'll kind of see how they are Ontario and BC kind of dense with lots of other pockets in Atlantic Canada, with a good number in that we found in Alberta. Unfortunately, as we've noted, certain programs like Nate's Alternative Energy program have been closed at hopefully temporarily, but we want to be able to show where these opportunities are available. Next. So when you toggle these basic filters, you'll be able to see how the map changes and basically helps you organize the information in the way you need it. I think that's about it for me. So thank you very much. And Kara and all of us are here for your questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Kara. Appreciate that, Shifraz. Great work from RFS Energy. So yes, that brings us to the question and answer and panel discussion portion of the session. I don't believe there is a question. Thank you, Ken. You're always good for a question. We appreciate that. Amy, I guess since I've got it open, I'll take this one. And if there's any more come in, we can keep going.
Sounds good.
For both WSP and RFS, please comment on the importance of training of collaborative project delivery methods and supportive processes such as Lean or BIM to support deep energy retrofits. I guess we can open that, like as you said, to all presenters if anyone wants to jump in.
I think Ken was trying to direct that at me directly, because this is exactly the work I tend to do right now. I'm delighted to work in sort of a integrated project delivery space. In fact, I'm currently in BC working on a project that is basically doing an all-electric police building, and it's a tribute to having an integrated team understand and work together to unlock how to do this cost effectively with no incentive programs. Actually, we have one pilot program that we're trying to work with BC Hydro on battery peak load shaving, as it's a pretty neat opportunity. So essentially, the training we did as a team around lean practices and how to work together to unlock this has been part of that willingness to collaborate deeply and frankly learn and somewhat fail along the way with certain things, but yet again try and do even more. So happy to talk forever about it, but I'll shut up now.
I can speak a little bit on sort of the whole building energy side and how like electrification projects in an IDP setting would be complicated to the sense that a lot of interactions between different building systems going on. So to have that sort of big room intensive design space to really bounce, ideas directly off each other and make sure that the systems are coordinated to support and promote that objective of electrification is a key component. So I think more projects that are following the IDP like alliance model are expected, and I think it's a good pathway for us to really explore or really fast track and optimize like deep retrofits from transitioning off of fossil fuel systems. So
Thank you, Shafraz and Andrew. Is there any other presenters that want to, I guess if you're in the answered tab, you can see the question again. Okay, if there's no others, I see Amy's replied to Peter Darlington's question.
I'm not sure my answer was that sufficient, however, so I don't know if Shafraz, you want to speak to this? Peter's question was, is there a place for general contractors to view and bid projects that might be coming up?
Yeah, in public sector work, a lot of bid sites like Merck's and Alberta Bids and Tenders or others are available for those publicly funded projects. Unfortunately, I don't think our province likes integrated project delivery as at November's kind of session, the Minister of Infrastructure came out and said, we only want to do P3 projects in Alberta, and actually discounted all of the opportunity and collaborative partnerships that IP would have. So don't get me started, but nonetheless, for general contractors, I think the construction associations are also a really great place to get a sense of what is coming up. They always have sessions to speak to the industry and the marketplace and actually give contractors and trades a heads up on some of the bigger, juicier projects. So talk to your local construction association. They're actually really in the know on that.
Thank you, Shafraz. If there are no other questions coming in, we have a few that are pre-planned. However, through kind of watching the presentation, and maybe I just need to hear somebody repeat it and maybe it's helpful for others attending. As you showed, the incentive programs for BC and Ontario include the utility companies. I think I just need to have somebody explain that a bit further, why if they're in the business of making money from people using energy, why are they integrated into the retrofit aspect and trying to encourage more energy efficiency?
I think I could speak to that a little. And I guess it depends on what region you're looking at and kind of what drivers are behind like their mechanisms for those utilities. Sometimes it's kind of sometimes there's kind of different drivers that are a focus for them, and that kind of, for if you look at Alberta's neighbor of BC, like they have quite a bit of key legislation and policies that enforce or even just kind of guide these efforts that encourage DSM goals or even GHG emissions reductions, such as kind of like their, the Clean Energy Act kind of affirms like the utilities' ability to support DSM and kind of have those goals. And the ministry kind of sets guidelines for these things as well that are kind of the pretty extensive and kind of the things that drive utilities like FortisBC and BC Hydro to pursue providing incentives to encourage those savings, whether it's natural gas or electricity savings. Ontario kind of functions a little bit differently than BC would, but similarly, there's this drive to kind of have energy savings and grid stability in places like Ontario. I'm from Manitoba. This is kind of not in the scope of this one, but in Manitoba, we have Manitoba Hydro is kind of that main deliverer of energy and kind of producing energy, but we also have Efficiency Manitoba, who kind of works alongside and is provincially mandated to have certain energy savings targets as well. So there's different kind of things that go into that, but there's usually kind of this underlying provincial kind of leadership role that kind of supports the utilities or efficiency organizations in the region that kind of encourages activity. Hope that answers that.
I can speak a bit from the BC side, so that's where I reside. BC Hydro being a Crown Corp as well, it can align with provincial aspirations and goals in terms of climate resilience or GHG reduction. So there's a direct kind of link there to the incentive programs that occurs through Clean BC programs that we're accustomed to. But ultimately, like the utility provider is really just trying to save cost on their side by the investment they have to do with upgrading infrastructure, increasing energy supply by incentivizing this with the client. They can reduce that anticipated cost. And as well, I think Kara spoke to it well, like managing peak demand. So like by incentivizing sort of off-grid or energy storage capabilities, they can better manage peak demand on the system and sort of more accurately sort of control it or shift it to smooth out the peak demand profile.
Awesome. Yep. Thank you. Thank you both, because that helps kind of compartmentalize it better in my head. So thank you. We have another question from Ken. Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I'll just read it for those watching the recording later. So the question is, an asset manager recently shared that a barrier to deep retrofits, even with a quick return on investment, is the misalignment with the investor disposition cycle, i.e. a 3-year return on investment would be passed if the asset is to be turned sooner than that. The advisor suggested we build skills on asset valuation to support the business case for retrofits. Is there any member of the panelists that wants to speak to that or provide comments?
I can comment on that initially. So I think that's a really important point because with shorter hold periods and the frequent asset turnover, even like a strong 3-year ROI can sometimes fall outside, like you said, an investor's disposition timeline. So I think the real opportunity is helping owners kind of understand how retrofits show up in asset value. So there's things like reduced operating risk. There might be stronger net operating income options, better tenant retention, lower exposure to like carbon costs. So I think it's kind of like diversifying what the asset value means outside of just the ROI sort of measurement. And I think that is what needs to be sort of put forward to try and unlock that potential.
Thanks, Hannah. Is anyone else?
Yeah, I guess to add just greater proactive, proactive involvement with identifying the measure, let's say, that needs to be replaced ahead of time, so that you don't have that period where you're going to replace it before the ROI, before you get your return. So a boiler needs to be replaced in 10 years out. You start with that incentive study ahead of time so that you're replacing it before, or you're getting your ROI and it's not within that timeline that needs to be replaced. So just more proactive planning of asset management, I think, go a long way.
And to Ken's point about training, yeah, that like learning how to do a pro forma and what developers do to make a pro forma work is definitely something we've identified as a skills that needs some more support in the marketplace and development. Very few, frankly, designers or even trades understand that whole business case or what the pro forma is and can help in my mind, understand even a net present value of how to bring those particular systems to show the long-term benefits. And as Hannah said, the co-benefits for triple net leases or the ability to lease up a space that has better value because to their tenants, it will operate more efficiently or cost effectively.
Great. Thank you, Shafraz. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. However, I think maybe what I'll do, we have 3 minutes left. Maybe can we try to squeeze one more in? I think there were a couple that were ready to go, but maybe we'll do one of
Sorry,
these open.
Dean,
Go
do you
ahead.
mind if I
Yep.
just jump in? We just got
Yeah, of
another
course. Oh, there we go.
audience
Okay.
question. So Bob's asking, how do we get clients prepared? How do we get clients prepared more accurate budgets for deep retrofits given current construction market volatility? So I guess, how do we get more accurate budgets?
Wow, use the magic 8 ball. Honestly, I think this comes down back to integration of the team. Like when we go directly to trade partners or to contractors who have a better feel of the pulse of the marketplace and can give better costing information rather than a cost consultant who is 3 months behind. That is my best bet to get accurate budgets and constructability for that. And our trade partners on a particular project alerted us to, like, for example, last year when the tariff uncertainty happens, like, hey, can we lock in a price now before these tariffs kind of wreak havoc on locking in pricing? So I always like to leverage trade or industry construction level professionals for that kind of help.
Any others want to reply on that, or shall we address the final question here maybe before we log off? Okay. Jim's asked, how do we get more accurate maintenance costs for LCCAs? Does anyone care to speak to that?
I don't want to hog the mic,
It's
but
okay. You might be better versed to speak to it. If you are, then that's the case.
on a life cycle cost assessment, we rely on the energy modeler to have really good idea of what the energy, natural gas and electrical costs are with escalation over a period of time, usually the total life cycle. And then we also need to talk to the suppliers of equipment and say, okay, hey, we're going to use this type of air handler or this type of heat pump. What are they usually have their own maintenance packages that they will sell you for their products. So by asking the supplier, hey, potentially what would you charge to come and maintain it? That's for me the best way, again, to get better ideas of what that will take over time.
That's a good point. All right, everyone. There's no other questions, so we are just at 1:01, well, Mountain Time. Thank you all for attending. Thank you to all the presenters for taking the time. So once again, really appreciate it. This was discovery session number 6. And so stay tuned to the ENBIX events page, I should say, for discovery session number 7, which is scheduled for June 11th for the Glenbow Museum, and then future up in Edmonton between July and September of this year. So once again, I'll close the session. Thank you all, and everyone have a great day.